Well, today we're going to be in chapter 5 of the book of Galatians. This is kind of a rah-rah speech, if you will, that Paul is going to give to the saints to say, come on back, let's rally together, let's stop following the false stuff, and let's follow the truth. Basically, is what he's trying to get at with this. So let's get started with verse 1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So this is an interesting idea, especially if you've watched the last several videos we've done on the book of Galatians and understanding Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant versus the law of Moses connections. He's pulling that together again here in verse 1 as Paul is equating the living the law of Moses, or as the Jews have interpreted the law, as a yoke of bondage. What worldly things do we make more important than the gospel of Jesus Christ? That is our yoke today. So we could look at even this verse, and while he's saying following all the onerous interpretations of the law of Moses is holding people down, we have to realize that what we are willing to put as a higher priority than Christ in our lives is holding us down. It is a yoke of bondage on us. It keeps us from being closer to Christ. Anything we make more important than following Christ is keeping us from coming closer to Christ. Always remember that. What is the yoke you are facing? What are the things that you are prioritizing more than your relationship with Jesus Christ? And let's get rid of those. Let's improve so that you can have a more closer direct connection with Jesus Christ himself. That is supremely important. We need to be focusing on that and going in that direction. So verse 2, behold, I, Paul, say unto you that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. So remember, if you've gone through our Paul videos, you understand this story. The Jewish Christians are trying to convince the Gentiles they have to follow Jewish culture to be Christian. And that's what he's saying here. If you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify, verse 3, again to every man that is circumcised, that he is a debtor to do the whole law. So just because you're circumcised doesn't help you, doesn't make you any closer to Christ. Okay? That's what he's saying. You still have to follow the law. You're still a debtor. The law can't pay that debt off for you by following the law. It's only through Jesus that you get that debt paid for. So verse 4, Christ is become of no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, you are fallen from grace. So he's addressing Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, who the Jewish Christians were, again, trying to convince Gentile Christians to follow the law of Moses, okay? Earlier in the book of Galatians, we talk about the idea of doctrine versus culture. And there's a challenge. Sometimes we think culture is doctrine. Now, there is a doctrine of the law of circumcision that was given to Abraham as part of his promise and was continued through Moses, the law of Moses, to do that, but was done away with in Jesus Christ. And so now, from a Christian standpoint, we would say that circumcision has become culture, no longer doctrine. Sometimes they shift, okay? And that's what Paul's trying to say here. If you still believe that circumcision is doctrine, then you are not following Jesus Christ. And you are leaving his gospel and his truth. That's what he's getting at here, basically, by saying these things. In fact, verse 5, he says, for we through the Spirit wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Jesus Christ neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love. So when we look at this, being circumcised or not doesn't affect whether you can be saved. You can't, I get circumcised, I'm closer to being saved. No. Okay? That's like the idea of sacraments. The sacraments has to be performed or you don't get into heaven. No. That's what Paul is teaching against. He's saying it's through your faith in Jesus Christ that allows you to be saved, not by obedience to the laws. Now, you still need to be obedient to the laws. That demonstrates your faith. That's exercising your faith in God by following his commandments. But it's not saving you by following his commandments. There's a distinction that's important to understand in that. So verse 7, he says here, ye did run well. Who did hinder you that ye should not obey the truth? So again, he's trying to say, guys, you had the gospel at one point. We taught you. You were baptized. You were confirmed a member of the church. You joined. You felt the Spirit. Why have you gone astray? Basically, verse 8: This persuasion cometh not of him that calleth you. Meaning, this isn't from Jesus. Jesus isn't calling you to follow him and then suddenly changing his mind. You need to realize that this has always been the plan. That's chapter 3 of Galatians, is Paul explaining Christianity has always been the plan, basically. Verse 9: A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. So leaven, if you're not familiar with this idea, when you make bread, you have to have something that causes it to rise. That's the yeast. That leavens the bread. It softens it up, it adjusts it, it puts the little gas bubbles in it so you get the airy fluffiness of the bread. If you don't do that, if you add no leaven to the bread, no yeast, you get flat bread. Okay, that's like pizza dough or things like that. Okay, like tortillas. Even though those, I guess they can be flour and corn. Like a tortilla, like those kinds of things, they're just flat. They're not fluffy and thicker. A little can change the whole lump. Once you get a little leaven in there and you stir it in, the whole lump starts to get leavened and taken out. You can't just, a little leaven just does a little bit and doesn't affect the rest. This is an important point for us to think about when we talk about following the truth. When you follow the truth, gaining some truth will help you want to follow more truth. And so it starts to change everything to be more truth. Same in the other way. If you follow falsehoods, that can continue to grow with you. So you want to realize this concept of either way, a little bit of it can go a long way. So this is, you think of the idea that Satan talks about, oh, just once. No one will ever know. Just once. Nope, that just once can change the whole life. That's what verse 9 is about. Good advice for us to always remember. Verse 10, he says, I have confidence in you through the Lord, that ye will be none otherwise minded. But he that troubleth you shall bear his judgment, whosoever he be. So maybe there is just one person who's causing trouble. It's interesting that he uses a more singular term in here. Okay, I have confidence in you that you will be none otherwise minded, but he that troubleth you. So there could be a ringleader in this. There could be one person that is the main instigator of these ideas that are causing problems and conflict for the Gentile Christians. Verse 11, he says, And I, brethren, if ye yet preach circumcision, why do I yet suffer persecution? Then is the offense of the cross ceased. I would they were even cut off with which trouble you. So this is really interesting, okay? He's talking about circumcision, okay? And he's like, guys, if you really believe that circumcision is the law, then you're not following the atonement of Jesus Christ, the cross. Then is the offense of the cross ceased. If that's true, then we don't need the cross. We don't need Jesus. But it's not. And it would be better. And verse 12 is kind of like Paul's frustration. He's basically saying, I would rather than make a big ordeal of whether or not you should have your male genitalia circumcised, you should just have it cut off all the way, castrated, basically. So Paul's mad at the Jewish Christians who are trying to convince the Gentile Christians that you must follow the Mosaic law to be Christian. He's like, guys, I'd rather you just cut your whole male genitalia off and not have this debate, because you're ruining people's understanding of the gospel. That's some strong words in there. Whew. Yeesh. Verse 13, For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. So again, he's doing this idea, you guys, we've given you the truth. You have been made free by this truth, not so that you can do whatever you want, but so that you can serve and love other people and help them out. Verse 14, he says, For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That is the second great commandment, according to Jesus. Okay, verse 15, But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed of one another. Now, this is an interesting idea, almost introducing, in a way, cannibalism into this concept. of bite and devour one another. So this is like attacking each other, hating each other, despising each other, killing each other, consuming somebody else's life. That's the challenge that he's talking about here. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be encouraging others to have life, not take it away from them. Verse 16, so that's, you can see in verse 15 easily that Master Mahan principle we've talked about a lot in the Old Testament. Verse 16, this I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So Paul taught that we should walk in the Spirit, and that if we do, we will overcome the lust of the flesh. Paul's words warned against participating in works of the flesh. These sins fall into 4 general categories. He's going to talk about some of these here. Sexual sins, which is fornication, refers to any immoral sexual relationship. Lasciviousness, which refers to unbridled or excessive lust. Another one is sins from the religious realm, such as idolatry and witchcraft. Another one he's going to bring up is sins against other persons, or variance is the word that's used. A variance can be interpreted as discord and is an outgrowth of hatred. Emulations are actions carried out in order to equal or be superior to another, often out of jealousy. And another one sin he's going to talk about are sins associated with alcohol, drunkenness, and revelings. Paul warned that those who habitually participate in these sins shall not inherit the kingdom of God. That's the New Testament study manual. It talks about that. So that's what he's going to get at here now, basically, is he's talking about this idea of walking in the Spirit. If you focus on being connected with the Spirit in your everyday life, having the Spirit with you all day, then the odds that you succumb to lust of the flesh is much, much lower. So if you've got challenges, pornography, adultery, any kind of lust of the flesh, too much reveling and partying, too much other things going on, too much sin, sexuality, other stuff like that, we need to walk with the Spirit. The more we can have the Spirit with us, the more the Spirit can guide us, and we will have less instance of those problems, of the lust of the flesh in our life. Walking by the Spirit is what we need to be focusing on. That is very important for us to be looking at, okay? That'll help us a lot. Now, verse 17, he's going to get into this a little more. There's a paradox that Paul brings up. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary, the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. This is super important for us to look at, okay? This is a very important paradox. This is the dynamic of life. Okay, there's spiritual ideas, there's worldly ideas, 2 different mentalities, and we're stuck in between both of them. We have a physical body and a spiritual body, a spirit side basically, and they're in conflict. The whole point of our life is to understand who wins that conflict. Are we going to follow God and let the Spirit supersede the body, or are we going to let the body supersede the Spirit? That's what life is about. Abraham 3:25, basically. It's all connected right there. So he goes on to say here in verse 18, but if ye be led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law. So the law is holding you down. The law is keeping you down. Sin is what he's talking about. When you follow the Spirit, you're repenting, you're improving, you can no longer be held by those laws. Verse 19, now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these. So these are the ones he's talking about here. We're going to get into these ideas. Okay? Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, which is pride, putting yourself above others, emulations, which is hating other people that are different than you, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, which is like fake news, false truths, going against lies and things, envyings, jealousy, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. So he's talking about these are the things that the world wants you to do. This is the worldly mentality. Okay? In fact, in the book, The Writings of St. Paul, they mention in their catalogues of virtues and vices were the simplest of the standard forms of moral teaching in the Greco Roman world, including Judaism. They were sometimes placed into a dualistic framework, the way of light and the way of darkness. Similarity here, Paul associates them with flesh and spirit. So this is a concept. He's using an idea, a concept of argument, of comparing and contrasting two lists of virtues together to teach these people. And this is a way of doing things that was common back then to do. Okay, so we can see that how he's building his argument is influenced by the culture of the world that he's living in at that time. I mean, it still works. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It still works and it's fine. But these are the things. This is the worldly mentality. Okay, the worldly mentality is adultery. So lusting after your going after other people you're not married to. Okay, so breaking your marriage covenants. Fornication, which is basically just sexual immorality of all types outside of the lawful legal marriage. Uncleanness, so doing things that keep you unclean. The Jews would recognize that as disobedience to the laws, like the dietary laws and other restrictions and customs that they would have. Lasciviousness, again, it's exploiting yourself, exploiting other people. Idolatry, which is fascinating. Idolatry is like in the middle of these here, which is cool because idolatry and adultery are actually the same thing. In Hebrew, it's basically the same word. So adultery is unfaithful to your spouse who you are covenanted to be with, you contracted to be with. Idolatry is breaking your covenants with God, basically. Worshipping other gods is type of idea. And so along with this, witchcraft, which is idolatry, hatred. Isn't that interesting that hatred is on that same line as witchcraft and idolatry? Hating other people is keeping you out of the kingdom of God. Remember in Matthew chapter 5, if you want to go watch that video, I would highly recommend it. Even Jared Halverson's video on YouTube on harmony versus orthodoxy, absolutely amazing. Hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, all of those are basically the same thing. It's hating other people, having a grudge against other people, not working with other people, violating the second commandment, okay? That's what that is, basically. All of these you can point back to either violating the second commandment or the first commandment, which is violating love God and violating love your neighbor. Basically, that's how that works out. So here's what's interesting is if you have a grudge against somebody, that's keeping you from coming closer to Christ. You cannot come, and Matthew chapter 5 talks about this, you cannot properly offer sacrifices to God. You cannot properly come to God and still have a grudge with your neighbor. You need to let go of the grudge. You need to knock that off. That's keeping you from coming closer to Christ. That is what this is talking about. Now he gets into seditions and heresies, which are like treasons, like going contrary to the teachings, listening to false teachings. Envyings, which is jealousy. That's also with pride in there as well, like those other ones. Murders, drunkenness, revilings, all of that, he says, are bad. That is the world. That's how the world thinks. We should clean all that out of our life. Get rid of all that. That's holding us back from God. Okay, what he wants us to do is the next list he's going to give us here in verse 22. He says, but of the fruit of the Spirit. So we could say verse 20 and 21 are fruit of the world. Okay, which is funny. Verses 20 and 21 pretty much name the main vehicle for doing movies. What movie is there that doesn't have 19, 20, or 21 in it? I mean, honestly, Hollywood, they just defined Hollywood's philosophy is the worldly philosophy. Don't follow the movies that Hollywood makes. If your life is living like Hollywood people, you're living the wrong life. Just let you know, okay? This is now in verse 22, the fruits of the Spirit. People who are following the Spirit, people who are keeping those commandments, who are doing things to keep the Spirit with them, are going to have these ones. The fruit of the Spirit is love. Not sexual love, but truly caring for other people. Joy, peace, not just a sense of fun, but a real lasting true peace inside. Long suffering, there's an important one. Gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness. Remember, the meek shall inherit the earth. The meek are humble people. Temperance. Temperance means is the Goldilocks zone, not getting too much, not getting too little, doing things just right. So sins of omission, sins of commission, we're balancing both of those and doing things just right. Okay, and he says here, against such there is no law. These are the fruits of the Spirit. This is the way we should act every day in everything of our life. Now, if you are LDS, I want to add a little extra piece onto this as well. Understanding section 121 of the Doctrine and Covenants, verses 41 through 43, basically mention this. This, from a leader standpoint, this is exactly how you should approach everybody that you have a stewardship for. This is how we should approach our day. This is how we should approach everything in life, is with these attitudes. If you do not have these attitudes, you need to work on coming closer to Christ. It's hard to say you have truly converted to Christ if you do not have those attitudes that we just mentioned. If you have the first set, you might not be all the way converted to Christ. And realize conversion is not an event. Conversion is a journey. So you'll have a mix of both, sort of, but the goal is to move towards the Spirit and do more with the Spirit. That's what they're here for, to teach us with. Okay, this is what happens when you have the Spirit with you. So focus on those. Have more of those in your life. And now verse 24, Paul goes on and says, and they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. Now this is an interesting point. They that are Christ's, if you're following Christ, you will crucify your lusts and your affections. Give up the worldliness to follow God. That is definitely easier said than done. But it is the goal of striving that helps us. And as we do that, Christ, as we strive, okay, think of the analogy of the guy that God told him to push the rock, and he tries and tries and tries and never ends up pushing the rock, and God's like, no, I asked you to push against the rock. I didn't expect you to move it. I will move it. I just wanted you to help. And so that's what this is God will make up that difference for us. That's the atonement of Jesus Christ. It will make up that difference. But we need to keep moving towards having these good qualities in our life that he mentions in verse 22 and 23. We need to always keep working on getting those more in our life. Have more of that every year in your life, and you'll keep coming closer to Christ. Very, very important. In fact, Elder Marvin J Ashton made a comment about this. He said, we must, if we will have happiness, follow the straight and prescribed paths. I will give you a pattern in all things is one of the Lord's great gifts and promises. Today it comes from him and his prophets. Keeping one's mind occupied with constructive, useful things on a constant basis prevents Satan from having success in idle minds. Happiness is a byproduct of righteous living and sharing with the framework of lofty patterns. Actions of the moment may be fun, but true happiness depends upon how you feel after the involvement is over. Not just the temporary high you get from substance abuse. It's the real lasting joy that stays with you when you do good things. That's the real happiness we should be seeking, not artificial, fleeting moments of excitement. So verse 25, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. So again, let's not cause problems for each other. Let's seek harmony. That's what we need to be doing. And that's what this is all about. So I hope you're seeing in chapter 5 the importance of what Paul is teaching the Galatians here. Some powerful teachings to help us to be better saints as well. So I hope you're seeing this. Let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue the book of Galatians.